So now we're going to talk about the concept of model view controller, which is pretty integral to Backbone.JS or any sort of framework. Continuing on from our JSPN example from the last video. Basically, without getting too complicated, model view controller is a design pattern. I know that for this particular design pattern, it took me a while before I could figure it out, like completely figure it out. But it's one of those things that you just have to kind of come back to over and over and over again, and you will in your web development kind of career if you're a serious web developer. I think most web developers start out by designing simple web pages that are basically HTML web pages. And then they kind of move on to doing stuff with WordPress. And WordPress is a really popular platform that a lot of people use to just make simple websites. And the nice thing about WordPress is that WordPress actually makes it really simple to get a page up and running. There is a little bit of, I guess you can go to the showcase here and you can see some stuff like pages that were made in WordPress. This is like a popular design. There's a little bit of a learning curve with WordPress because it's basically PHP. But then, like I said, at some point the features become overwhelming, to the point that you don't need a lot of stuff. So you get to building, I guess in your web development career, you get to building your own kind of like WordPress, if you will. But it's not really WordPress. You're actually building your own kind of framework, website framework. That's really the key. So if you choose a framework like JavaScript, then like, okay, what plugins, what themes you want to like add to your thing. And then the way you start talking about web design becomes kind of different. It's no longer so much about, like what goes on a page per se, but what kind of content that's coming in, and how do you conceptualize, the content that comes in, and how do you talk about it without being overly technical. Well, if you think about it, any kind of content, or any kind of, I would say like any kind of these links or any of these, pieces of data. We've got tags here. You could all conceptualize them as sort of models, and that's what really a model is. Like, it's pieces of data. It's something that is belongs to maybe like a database. WordPress works with a database. It works with like a MySQL database most often, and a lot of times, a lot of the content that is coming in is not being written by the web developer. It's actually being written by somebody else, like somebody who might be a blogger, and that content is actually being saved to a database on a server somewhere, and then WordPress basically loads in all of that content using PHP. Now, if you use a framework, you can do the same exact thing. You can load in content that comes from a server, and like I said, without all the frills, you can build your own that's a lot simpler, and a lot of people have, that runs much faster than maybe a WordPress site. And because we're using Backbone.JS in our example, having content that is written somewhere else and then published to your site using JavaScript, if your site is primarily written to be effective for scaling, then you won't see much of a slowdown. Actually, you'll see a lot of content come up and very quickly. So that's the kind of the gist. Like, if you think about it too, like models, you've got models. Models, what does that really mean from a technical standpoint? Well, it also means like, what exactly are you talking about? Like an object, object-oriented programming. Object-oriented programming just means that basically, instead of just saying, I'm going to have like a variable, and I'm going to have an array, and I'm going to have a function here that I'm just going to slap. You're saying, I'm going to take all of these pieces, like a variable, an array, and a function, and I'm going to say that all of those things relate to this piece of data, like a business, or to food. So if I have functions that print out something about food, and they probably belong to the food model. If I have something that prints out something relevant to Coca-Cola, then it probably belongs to the Coca-Cola model. And we can get more in depth with this, but I just want to give you kind of a general overview of what like this whole model view controller is. View kind of refers to the overall presentation of the website. So what goes on each page, and then also not just what goes on each page, but all of the pieces of the page too. These are all called elements. This is an element, a link element. It's also a navigation element. So when you are up here and you click on something, you expect to go to another page like we just did here. So clicking on stuff, that is the control part. So controller, controller changing stuff, expecting to see things happen on the page, seeing special effects. Let's see if I can give you another example here. Well, this was without. Let's see if I have this old website. Oh, actually, I know. We'll use one of my my friend's websites. So like here I've got my friend's website. She's a interior design agency for restaurants, and if you click on her personal web page, you can see this view, if you will. This is a view that just came up, right? And then when I click on elements within this view, I can see the photos change. So right here, I'm doing the control part of the page. So again, all of this text and information here is the model part, right? This relates to Akasha. Akasha is one restaurant. So you can consider Akasha restaurant has this data about it. It has this text. It has the function that prints out something about Akasha here. That's relevant to the model. And then it has a view, right? This view can go away if I click on it. And then these are the controls. So that's basically the gist. In Backbone, models are separated onto their own JavaScript page or script page, if you will. They're sorted into their own category, and then views and control are kind of like put together. The view handles both the control and the presentation of the view in Backbone. That's the way I kind of look at it. There are other frameworks like Angular that kind of are similar. It's like model view, and then the view kind of handles both control too. In cases like Ruby on Rails, control is actually separate from the view. The view is actually presented in templates. But we can get more into that. Like I said, this is a basic general, kind of overview. If you get that, then it's pretty easy to kind of get moving forward. So in our next example, we'll kind of go over models more specifically and how we can build a model from, like I said, from a technical standpoint, we can build just like a piece of data that is built from simple JavaScript variables that is more meaningful to somebody and can do a lot of stuff. So that'll be our